There is one remaining hostage in Gaza,
Oh,
right?
like
The remains of one
Yeah.
hostage.
all the
All
remain.
of the living hostages, thank God, have been returned. Unfortunately, they didn't return all the people they took alive. Most of them were returned, but many of them they killed in captivity. And there is one last hostage, one last Jew remaining in the Gaza Strip. So we're going to dedicate today's lesson to his family, and you'll see why I'm sharing this now, because it's related exactly to the subject that we're going to be talking about. We're going to discuss over here the reunion between Joseph and his brothers and their father. That's this week's parsha. So we know the end of last week's Torah portion, Joseph sets this whole thing up. The brothers come down to Egypt for food, and he puts in his goblet into the youngest brother's sack, and then he sends someone to chase after him. Why do you steal my special goblet of divination? And the beginning of this week's portion, Judah, who takes responsibility for his youngest brother Benjamin. His father Jacob didn't want to send Benjamin, but Judah said, "You have to, and I will take responsibility." So he's the one who approaches Joseph, not knowing that it's Joseph, and says, "You must let my brother go." Why must you let my brother go? Why is it so important? Because otherwise, I'm going to paraphrase, basically, you're going to kill my father. You're going to kill my dad. He's an old man. He's back in Canaan. He didn't want to send him. You made it this whole story makes no sense to us. Why do you even talk about our family? You don't talk with most people about their families who come for food. Why'd you get into our business? So the whole plea of Judah to Joseph is that this boy is so attached to his father. And if something happens to him, something can happen to his father. Their souls are bound together. So after hearing this plea from Judah, Joseph can no longer contain himself. And what does Joseph do? He sends all the Egyptians out of the room, and he tells them, he confesses to them, I am Joseph. Ani Yosef, I am Joseph. Let's give a look. Chapter 45. Joseph couldn't bear the thought that all the Egyptians standing beside him would see his brother's shame when he revealed himself to them. So he called out, and what did he say? Take everyone away from me. Thus no one should stand with Joseph when he revealed himself to his brothers. Verse number 2. He wept so loudly that the Egyptians heard. Pharaoh's household heard. Verse number 3. Joseph says to his brothers, I am Joseph. Right? And what's the next words?
Is my father still
Is
alive?
my father still alive? But his brothers were unable to answer him because they were ashamed before him. Then what does he continue? Joseph says to his brothers, please come closer to me. They drew closer. He said to them, I am your brother Joseph, whom you sold to Egypt. But now don't be upset or angry with yourselves that you sold me to this place. For now we see that God sent me ahead of you to save your lives. For 2 years now that there's been a famine in the land, and there won't be any plowing or harvesting for another 5 years. Page 303. God sent me ahead of you to ensure your survival in the land and to sustain great salvation. Now, it is not you who sent me here, but God. He made me an advisor to Pharaoh, a master over all his household, and a ruler over the entire land of Egypt. Hurry up and go to my father and say to him, this is what your son Joseph said. God has made me master of all Egyptians. Come down here to me. Do not delay. You can dwell in the land of Goshen. Okay, we get the point? Question. Joseph's first words to his brothers are, I am Joseph. Is my father still alive? What type of question is that?
Sincere question.
We're talking, what's the reason why why did Judah tell them? Why do we have to make sure Benjamin gets returned? Because if not,
his father will die.
his father will die. So obviously his father's alive. The whole conversation is about Jacob. This whole conversation up until this point was all about Jacob. And how delicate we have to be with him. And how connected he is with Benjamin. And you can't take Benjamin for a slave. Take me instead. So what is he asking? Is my father still alive? What do you mean is my father still alive? That's the whole conversation we're having now. It's precisely because he's alive that I'm asking you to give him up, to give up Benjamin. So what type of question is Joseph asking? And if he was really concerned, he doesn't even wait for an answer. We don't find anywhere that they told him an answer yes. Where's the yes? He is still alive. And what's puzzling over here is the following. There are many, many commentaries on the Bible. Probably the book that has the most commentaries from any other book in the history of books is the book of the Torah. Has the most commentaries written on it. Hundreds, thousands throughout the centuries have written commentary on the Torah. But there's one that stands out from all of them. He's considered to be the main commentary on the Torah. That's Rashi. What's unique about Rashi versus other commentaries is that Rashi describes his own commentary as being according to the Pshutei Shel Mikra. Rashi is coming to give commentary to explain the simple explanation of the verse. So if there's a simple question to be asked, Rashi should be addressing it. If Rashi does not address a simple question, one of two things. Either he already addressed it in a previous commentary, and he expects you to know the previous commentaries. He doesn't expect you to know the further commentaries. But up until this point, you should have already read till here. So based off of previous writings, we'll answer the question that we have until now. Or, according to the simple explanation, the simple reading of the Torah, there is no question. You may have a question, but that question is a little bit more sophisticated. The simple reading, the simple reader, as Rashi says, the 5-year-old reader, doesn't have that question. And therefore, there's no reason to address it. So there are many questions that others give commentary on. But all of those are not the simple, and they don't explain it, maybe, according to the simple reading. But Rashi is unique. Now, on Rashi itself, there are many commentaries also. But the question we have is this question that Joseph asks, is my father still alive? Seems to be a silly question. It's so silly that a 5-year-old that reads, a simpleton that reads the story, has that question. Why are you asking this? You know that your father is alive. You don't need to be a scholar. You don't need to have any background information, the Chumash, to realize that this seems to be a silly question. So why doesn't Rashi address this at all? Rashi does not address this question, and seemingly this question is the perfect question for Rashi to address. This is exactly the type of question that Rashi wrote his explanation on the Torah for. I'm reading the verses all telling me that Yaakov is alive. The brothers are telling Joseph that the father is alive. And then he comes and says, I am Joseph. Is my father still alive? What are you talking about? Is my father still alive? We got it?
Yep.
So this is a question on the Torah, on Joseph. No, not on the Torah, but on understanding the story of Joseph. And specifically, we're going to address Rashi. Why doesn't Rashi deal with this? It seems like something that Rashi should have addressed. So many commentaries offer explanation on this. Chief among them is the Abarbanel. And a common theme among many of the commentaries is that Joseph knew that his brother, as soon as he says, I am Joseph, how do you think they're going to react? How do you think his brothers will feel? They'll feel embarrassed,
Or worried.
guilty.
Afraid.
They're gonna automatically retreat and walk away out of shame and guilt and whatever other words you want. And fear, maybe of retribution, exactly.
Yeah.
So he knows as soon as he breaks the news to them that they will react in a very retreating way. So therefore, it's incumbent upon Joseph to engage with them, to start a conversation with them. And therefore, he uses this word, this question, is my father still alive, as a way to just engage in conversation. It was a rhetorical question just to He threw it out there. He knew the answer, but he just wanted to talk to them. No, that was after. First he says, my father, then that was right after that. Right after he gets into the whole thing about God sent me here. So before he goes into that, he needs them to listen. He doesn't want them to shut down and from fear, to shut down from perhaps anger, to shut down from guilt. So he shares these words with them just to have the conversation starter, basically. And this will help address why Rashi doesn't comment on this. Why doesn't Rashi comment on this? So let's turn to the beginning of the Torah. In the beginning of the Torah, we have a couple. They're called Adam and Eve. Anyone ever heard of them?
Yeah.
First couple, Adam and Eve. They had a great life for a few minutes. And then their marriage hit a tree called the tree of knowledge, where they were forbidden to eat from the food, right? So open up turn the pages if you want, the beginning of the Torah. And this is chapter 3. Chapter 3, Genesis chapter 3, verse number 9. This is right after the sin of eating from the tree of knowledge.
They heard the sound of Hashem?
Yeah. Very good. So the story with the snake convinces Eve to eat from it, and then Eve convinces Adam to eat from it. And then the Torah says their eyes opened up and they realized that they were naked and they had to cover themselves. So they covered themselves with fig leaves. And then the Torah says, verse number 8, and they hear the sound of God traveling in the garden. And what happens? Adam becomes very fearful. Next verse. God calls out to Adam and Eve. And what does he ask Adam? He says, where are you? Now let me ask you a question. Who asked this question?
God. I mean, really?
God asked the question, where are you? If God doesn't know where Adam is, what type of God is that? If he needs help to figure out, call a friend, Adam, where are you? Huh? God retired. What's going on over here? This is a basic question. What God asks Adam, where are you? What do you mean, where are you? God, you know where everybody is. How do you ask God, where are you? So Rashi says over there, Rashi says on the spot, and for verse number 9, Ayeka, where are you? So he says the following words, Yedea hayekenu. Of sure God knew where Adam was. God wanted to start a conversation with him. He knew Adam was afraid. God wanted to start a conversation with him. So he starts the conversation by throwing out the question, where are you? Then he won't be startled to answer. He doesn't come right away and say, why'd you eat from the tree? Why'd you eat from the tree? You're going to shock the man. He's not going to know what to say. He's not going to respond appropriately.
Somebody's eating something unkosher.
Stop.
Right? And you say, what are you doing? You're not saying, I want to know what you're doing. You know what you're doing. You want that guy to say, oh, I'm doing something bad. That's what's happening.
Similarly, similar idea, except for this is a little bit after the sin was over. He wasn't doing it. This conversation didn't happen in the act. It was after the story was finished. He realized he was naked. He put on his clothes and he was hiding out of fear. So now you see someone, happens all the time, a child makes trouble and they realize that the teacher or the principal is found out about it. So what do? They try to hide. So how does a good teacher or principal deal with it? You come and scream right away, or you can come to the office and you start a conversation with them. And then in the middle of the conversation, you bring up the offense that was committed and you deal with it. So that's what God was doing. He started coming, where are you? How you doing? Right? How you doing? How's everything? And then, why are you there? What brings you to, why do you have clothes on? A few minutes ago, you didn't have clothes on. How do you know that you're naked? Oh, you ate from the tree. Ah, that thing that I told you not to eat from. Okay, now we can have a conversation. So this concept already exists, where Rashi already gave explanation that sometimes questions are asked just to be conversation starters. And we find the same thing again when Cain kills his brother Abel. God asks him, Hey, Hevel Achicha, where is your brother Hevel? God didn't know. He knew he just killed him. That's why why do you think God's talking to them for? Because he wanted to address, why did you kill your brother? But he asked, in order to start the conversation. So there's a concept in Torah already from the beginning where Rashi addresses it, and therefore there's no need for Rashi to address it over here. Joseph's question, is my father still alive, is similar to the question where God asked Adam, where are you? Or God asked Cain, where is your brother? Similar idea. The answer was known, it was just asked in order to start a conversation. However, it's a good explanation for why Rashi doesn't address it over here, because we should already know it from before. But it doesn't actually fit in the reading, because if we've been talking about the life of our father, if we're siblings and I'm telling you all about my father's life and how the troubles that he's going through and he will go through, if you want to start a conversation, you don't ask me, is my father still alive? You say, how's your marriage? How are the kids? How's the mishpacha? You don't address the one thing that we were talking about that we know that it's just the wrong question to ask as a conversation starter. There is a concept that you ask questions you already know the answer to just to start a conversation. But there also is a concept, a little bit of discernment. You don't ask a silly question. You ask a real question. How's the family doing? How long was the trip? Was it a good flight? Did you have a good flight? How are you? You don't right away ask the one thing that you already know the answer to because we were just speaking about it 3 minutes ago, or actually 30 seconds ago in this instance. So it seems like it doesn't really fit. This explanation does not really fit. Yes.
How was your father? Then after he said
Yes.
from Joseph, he says, now that you told me that your father wants Benjamin back, now that you know who I am, how is my father, because he's also my father, so now I want more detail. Not just is he alive, but more detail, because he's my father. This is not a conversation between
Strangers.
strangers. Now we're talking.
That's a very good explanation. It's a very good potential explanation. And perhaps we can, in Roslin's commentary, it will fit good. I say that seriously, but for Rashi doesn't say that. He doesn't say anything. No. I'm explaining like this. The question we're addressing is, why doesn't Rashi say anything? If Rashi would write that, it would be perfectly fine. It seems that Rashi is not going with that explanation because he doesn't write it. And even greater is the second question we asked earlier. So where was the response? He didn't wait for a response. It sounds very good, but then when you read further, he didn't wait for them to say, oh, now that you asked, I'll give you some more detail, how his health really is. Now that you asked, he just moves on to the next thing. It doesn't seem like he really cares for an answer. So if he was if you wanted intimate details, how a brother would ask a brother, how is our father doing? He should have waited to hear those details. So here's another idea. And this idea is, in Hebrew, there's a letter Hey. If you were to ask the question in Hebrew, is my father still alive? How would you ask that question? You would say, Od Avi Chai, with a question mark. Is my father still alive? Or Od Avinu Chai, question mark. Is our father still alive? Joseph says, Ha-od, with a Hey in the beginning. What does a Hey in the beginning do to the word? The. That's the literal meaning. But in this, when there's a question mark at the end of the sentence, ha'od, the hey in the beginning, makes it into a question. It's almost like you don't need the question mark at the end because the hey in the beginning turns it into a question. But what's the difference? There's two types of questions. The two types of way that you express a question. There's a question that you're looking for an answer to, right? And then there's a question that comes out of your mouth out of amazement, out of wonderment. You say, did that really happen? It's not a real question. It's a rhetorical question, but it's not even a rhetorical question that's a logical thing. It's a question out of amazement. The ha'od avichai, with the hey in the beginning, ha'od avichai, turns the question from a question into waiting for an answer. That's not what Yosef. It wasn't a question he waited out. It was a wonderment. In wonderment, he expressed himself. Ha'od avichai, how is it possible? How is it possible that my father's still alive? That was Joseph's question. That he's alive, of course he's alive. We're talking about him now. It's obvious that he's alive. But how is the man alive still?
Why?
Oh, so why is it such a wonder why his father's alive? Especially when you know the history. How old was Yaakov's father when Yaakov's father Isaac died? How old was Isaac when he died?
Over 100, right?
180. How old was his grandfather Abraham when he died? 175. So Yaakov at this time was 130. So what's the big deal? He didn't reach the age of his father or his grandfather. He's years away from their age. So what's the big shock? Why? How is it possible that he's still alive? We know he has good genes. What do you mean, how? Why should you assume that he shouldn't be alive? He's only 130. You know how old your father is? He's 130. Grandpa died at 180. And great-grandpa died at 175. So he's got many, many years to still live. Why are you so shocked that he's alive? That's number one. Number two is another question. Why is this relevant to his brothers? You're shocked that your father's still alive. Why is that relevant to your brothers right now? You just told them that you're Yosef. Talk to them. You speak to them. Engage them. We're going to tell them about your shock that your father's still alive. You deal with that when they leave. The first thing you have to say is this. This is the first thing that comes out of your mouth to your brothers. It seems a little bit lacking in explanation. So if it's a real question, we understand why he asked the first thing, because that was the most important thing for him to know. But we don't understand how come he didn't know his father was alive. If it was just engaged with them in conversation, we understand why he would say the first thing. But it seems, as we mentioned, not like something that would be the appropriate way to start a conversation. There are other questions that could be asked, not a silly question like that. But if it's a question of, if it's an expression of wonderment, so why is that important to express right now? So here's the explanation. Let's turn in the Chumash to chapter 37. And we'll read something fascinating over here, a lesson for life and death. And this is where I told you before how it's going to be related to the last remaining hostage in the Gaza Strip. This is the beginning of the story of Joseph when his brothers sold him to Egypt. And they come back to their father and they bring the coat that's soaked in blood, goat's blood, to their father. And the Torah says in chapter 37, verse 34, in our Chumash on page 253. This Chumash, turn to page 253. Look what the Torah says over here. Yaakov tore his garments and tied sackcloth around his waist. He mourned many days for his son. Now we know after someone suffers a close loss in the family, they sit Shiva. How many days is Shiva? 7 days. Torah doesn't say he sat for 7 days. It says he sat many days. He mourned his son for many days. How many days is many days? Rashi says many days is 22 years. He mourned his son every day of life. He never gave up. He never stopped mourning. A little bit meshuggah. Continues. All his sons and all his daughters tried to console him, but he was unable to be consoled. He said, I will go down to my grave while I'm still mourning for my son. Yaakov refuses to be consoled for the loss of Joseph. Why does Yaakov refuse to be consoled for the loss of Joseph? The Talmud shares with us something fascinating about death. God did every human being a favor. I'm not using the exact language, but I'm sharing the idea. The favor that God did was that time heals the loss of life. When someone that you're closest with is taken from you, is taken from this world, there is deep pain and grief to the point where if they were truly, truly very close with you, you can't come to yourself. But if that would remain for every day of life, we would have no functioning human beings in this world. No one would be able to function. No one would be able to create. No one would be able to work. Nothing would happen because everyone would be in this, imagine, in the worst state of grief and forever. So God did us all a favor. And he made that with time. The natural process is that with time, it begins to heal. With time, you begin to forget. That feeling begins to fade. It doesn't happen right away, but there's an initial day, and then there's 3 days, and then there's 7 days, and there's 30 days, and then there's 11 months, and then there's a year. And with each passing day, the loss becomes diminished. And that's how you're able to go back to work. That's how you're able to function with the other people that you love. That's how you're able to be consoled. And in English, we say, you're able to move on. Not, God forbid, that you forget. Not that, God forbid, you become detached. But you're able to move on with life, notwithstanding the loss. Yaakov refuses to be consoled. Yaakov never gave up. He never allowed for this to stop. You know why? Because the rule that God created only applies to death, not to people that are alive. Kidnap, God forbid, a child is kidnapped and taken from their parent. Their parent cannot be consoled because there's no closure there. There is no death that puts an end to it, and now time can begin to heal. The rule that God made was only for the dead, not for the living. And since Joseph was alive, subconsciously, Yaakov wasn't aware consciously he was alive, but subconsciously he couldn't get over the loss of Joseph because it just never kicked in. So no matter what words were shared to him, no matter what his sons told him, no matter what his daughters told him, no matter what anybody told him, it just didn't enter. He wasn't hearing it. He wanted no part of it. Subconsciously, it's because Joseph was actually still alive. Teaches us a very powerful lesson when it comes to closure. How closure is necessary in order to move on. And although there's a contrast here between life and death, between Joseph and Yaakov not being able to move on, The same thing applies when it comes to when you have remains and you're able to bury them. Even after death, there's a process of burial where someone is taken and they're put into the ground. And as difficult as it is, we bury them. But that process, although in the moment it doesn't feel like it, but afterwards it actually begins the process of healing. And as long as parents know that their child, or so long as someone knows their close relative, was killed and murdered in Gaza or anywhere, and they can't get that body, they still do not have complete closure. It's an open wound. Time can't heal that wound. Time could only heal closed wounds. It can't heal open wounds. So Joseph being kidnapped from his father, being sold into slavery, Yaakov not knowing where he was, yeah, they told him a story, he's dead. That look, we have his coat, it's filled with blood. So you would think, okay, move on. It didn't work. It didn't work. 22 years, Yaakov is walking around as if Joseph died today. Rashi is the one that tells us on this verse why he refuses to be consoled. Because a person cannot receive consolation for those that are living. Even they think that they're dying. Because it's only on death that God made the decree that it should slowly be removed from your heart. Not someone is alive. So with this information that we already know from a previous Rashi from two portions ago, in chapter 37, now let's go back to the story with Joseph. Joseph has the big reveal. The big reveal is what? I am Joseph. When I hear myself saying these words, I am Joseph, what immediately comes to mind? How is my father still alive? I'm alive. I'm Joseph. How did the man walk around 22 years with this open wound like this? He said it in shock, with the realization that his son is alive and it's been impossible for him to be consoled. It's a long time. How does a man live with this? That's Joseph's question. He wasn't looking for an answer. It wasn't a question, it was an answer. It was a rhetorical question, it was a question of bewilderment, of amazement. What type of person my father is, that he's still walking around, he's still alive after all of this. What does he say next? Doesn't wait for an answer. What does he say next? He tells his brothers to come close. And then what does he tell them? He says, go and tell our father that God sent me here to Egypt, to be in charge of Egypt, to give you guys life and to sustain the world with food. And it's all part of God's plan, etc., etc., etc. What's the first thing Joseph tells his brothers to do? Go, tell your father, our father, that Joseph's alive, he's in Egypt, and come down to Egypt right away. Why is it so important for him to come down to Egypt right away? There's life and death, Joseph says. Talking about life and death. Every day Yaakov is alive is almost like a miracle. To walk around with such grief. How does a human being handle it? How can he have so much pain like that? Go and tell him immediately come down to Egypt. Immediately. Don't waste any time. Hurry up and bring him down here. So the obvious question is, what do you mean they should go? You pick yourself up, Joseph, and go. If you care so much about your father, you go. What's this business that you guys take wagons and go get our father and bring him back down here and tell him a story? This was an obvious question they would ask. Joseph was preempting this by saying, how did I get here in the first place? It's all part of God's plan. I've been here on a mission. This whole story is one big mission for me to be here right now in Egypt. I can't leave. This is God's master plan that all came to life right now. We see the end of the story right here. I can't pick myself up and leave right now.
What is,
I have to be here. So you call our father and bring our father down here. So Joseph was answering why he couldn't leave by explaining to them how he ended up here and why he ended up here. Now we see God placed him here. And he stresses this 3 times in the verses. That God put me here for a reason to give life and sustenance. Tell our Father that it's all because of God. You didn't send me here. God sent me here, etc. It's all part of this, yes?
You ain't it. Right.
Okay. So this is the explanation. There's one more idea over here. And that is multiple times, usually Rashi doesn't repeat himself, but there is one Rashi that Rashi repeats himself multiple times. That is how Jacob, was punished for 22 years. That his son Joseph was taken from him. And why was Joseph taken from him for 22 years? As a punishment for him not being with his parents and honoring his parents for 22 years. After the story with Esav, when he runs away from his brother Esav, he spends 22 years away from his parents. To get married, where he gets married, he starts a family, then he works for Lavan. It takes him 22 years till he gets back home. When he reunites with Esav, it's 22 years later. So 22 years, Yaakov did not fulfill the mitzvah of honoring your father and your mother. And as a punishment for that, Yaakov's son Joseph also was taken from him for 22 years, being unable to fulfill the mitzvah of honoring your father and your mother. So measure for a measure, Rashi basically says. 22 years, Yaakov didn't do the mitzvah of honoring your parents, so he was stripped of having his child honor him for 22 years. His child was taken from him for 22 years. Joseph recognized at this point, this is 22 years he's been away from his father. Joseph recognizes that the time is finished. The time of punishment is done. And therefore, go tell our father to come down to Egypt immediately. Because now, after a time of punishment, is where it's appropriate now to make up, so to speak, for the lost time. Now let's reunite. And we'll conclude with this teaches us an important lesson when it comes to discipline. Discipline is necessary in life. Everyone needs to be disciplined in life. It doesn't ever feel good to be disciplined. Although the verse says, if you love discipline, it's a healthy life. And certain people are in position that they need to discipline others. Parents, teachers, principals. And the Torah is teaching us something over here like this. Although sometimes it's necessary, but when it's not necessary anymore, the moment it's not necessary, the moment that time is up, the moment the punishment is finished, you must embrace fully with the right hand immediately. Draw them close and show love. Immediately, don't wait. Do it immediately. As soon as the time was ready for Joseph to reveal himself to his brothers, immediately Joseph says there's a sense of urgency over here. The reunion has to take place. It can't wait. You guys don't stick around in Egypt anymore. Don't talk on the way. Go straight to our father and bring him immediately down. I'm going to send wagons. We'll get him here as soon as possible. Because now it's the time of love. Now it's the time of reuniting. Now it's the time where we have to unconditionally bring each other closer to each other. And that's why Joseph pushes a sense of urgency over here. Because he recognizes, yes, it's true, I am Joseph. And because I am Joseph, that puts into question, how is it possible for a human being, even like my father, to walk around 22 years with an open wound, with no closure. And if since that's the case, I need you guys to go immediately and get him and bring him back down here. Let's close the wound. Let's reunite. Let's make the story have a celebration in its conclusion. Let it have that joyous reunion at the end. So this answers the question we asked in the beginning. How come Joseph doesn't wait for an answer? It wasn't a question, he was looking for an answer. This answers why Rashi doesn't tell us an explanation here, because he relies on the fact that we already knew 2 weeks ago that Yaakov refused to be consoled. So with everything now lined up nicely, we see a theme that runs through the whole thing. So sometimes it's not what you say, but it's what you don't say. Rashi is precise in his language. And when there is no Rashi, when there is no interpretation, that also gives us reason to study and to discover what is going on in these verses over here. So I think we addressed everything. And as I mentioned in the beginning, hopefully I share this because you see clearly in the Torah that this concept of closure is important. And we do have one remaining person whose remains and his family did not yet receive closure, although they know that he's killed, but they were not yet able to bury him. And we have to continue to pray and do anything that we could that their family is able to get back the remains and be able to bring them to proper Jewish burial. And hopefully this will be the end of the whole October 7th story, where the Jewish people collectively will be able to get closure. And the ultimate closure is, we learned this week's parsha, I don't know why things have to happen. Negativity has to happen. Such darkness has to be brought to the world. However, it did happen. And as a Jewish people, we are waiting now for God's embrace, God's love to be shown. Shower us with love, with the yamin mikarevis, with the right hand, the drawing us closer. Because we have already experienced enough smoil doicha, the left hand pushing away. It's high time for the yamin mikarevis, for that right hand to bring us close, to give us the embrace. And may we merit all to appreciate Hashem's love and embrace, and in a revealed way, all things good, materially, physically, spiritually, and of course, the ultimate consolation, and really the only consolation, is going to be the coming of Mashiach. May it happen without delay. Amen. Anyone have any questions today? Yeah.
Did Jacob even realize that he's being punished?
Did Jacob realize that he's being punished? Solid question. I can't tell you that I know the answer to that question because I don't.